The first videos on adding alternative login methods to Alpha Anywhere using social network credentials focused on setting up developer projects for each of the social networks, taking the information from those projects in the form of a public key and a private key, and adding them to the project properties. It also showed how to get a redirect URL from the project properties that can then be re-entered into the developer projects for each of the social networks. The next step is configuring the web security to be able to use the name providers that we have created. The first step is to go into web security configuration and open up the configuration. You'll note there's an option here to add alternative login. When we add alternative login, the user must still have an account within the Alpha security system, even though they are using credentials from the social network. They are using these credentials in place of a traditional user ID and password. If the user only has alternative login, they do not need a password to get into the system. They can simply use their social network credentials. When we check this option, a couple other options become available to us. For example, we can automatically add an authenticated user to this web Alpha security. In the case of a situation where the user has logged in from a social network and they do not yet have an account within the Alpha security system, checking this option will allow a new account to be created. When the new account is created, we use a user ID that is developed from the information that comes from the social network. For example, in the case where the user ID is a value, we will attempt to use the display name for the user from that social network to create a new user ID. The user ID will be unique for that particular user. In the case where the user ID configuration is set up as email address, and we come over and we set up to automatically add an authentication user to security, in that particular case, the user's email address from the social provider will be used to create a new account if one does not exist. The next particular option allows us to automatically link to an existing user security account. If the user already has an account in the Alpha security that uses, for example, an email address, and that same email address is used by a social provider, if they attempt to log in from that provider and this option is checked, that provider credentials can be automatically linked to the existing Alpha security account. This normally is only used when the user ID is set up as email, because that will always be unique. Also, we have an after login event. When we're automatically logging in from an alternative source, this will normally do a full page reload after the login because of the methods being used. Because we're doing a full page reload, any after login events that are defined within a component will not fire. Therefore, we can use this particular event here and define this particular event using the values that are supplied. As you can see, we have the user ID, whether the login has succeeded or not, and whether there was an error. Also, we can redirect to a different URL. This just allows us to set up session variables or to change where the user will go after login, depending on other values. Also, for automatically adding a user to security, we may want to automatically add a security role for that user. If we go into the Customize options, we will see we can set a default security group. This will allow us to add a security group to a new record if one has not been specified. So we can open up, and this will show all the security groups that are available for this particular project. We can select a particular security role that will be used for all new users. If we come back to the beginning, if we have not checked Allow Alternative Login previously, when we save the security settings will create a new special table to store all the alternative login information. Therefore, if you're using a SQL database, it may open up a login builder to allow you to build a new table for the SQL database that will contain all this information. After you've configured all the security settings, we can now configure the various components so that they can use these settings to go out to get information from the social network.